Good morning. It's great to be here at React Rally. I'm really thankful to the organizers for having me, to Shiloh for organizing, to the tech people in the back for giving me the microphone. Can we get a round of applause for everybody involved in this? Yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible work. This is a tremendous speaker lineup. I could go on and on saying the praise of this conference, but we do have 25 minutes, so I'll get on with the presentation. My name is Tejas. That's pronounced like contagious. Unfortunately, this got me a lot of trouble during the pandemic, as you can imagine. I had to switch and do something like advantageous. But anyway, I run a very small agency that helps developer-focused companies with DevRel. We help them do developer relations well. And over the course of my career, I've been writing React now for nearly 10 years or so. And over the course of that, I've been able to work either on the team of some of these brilliant companies here or in some type of consulting capacity. And it's just been absolutely tremendous to be able to play in this field, in this inclusive community with everybody around. If you have questions about DevRel or anything, I'm here all day. I'd love to talk to you about that. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. Today, the title of this talk is Why Everyone Needs to Use a Framework. Why everyone needs to use a framework. And you might be reading this title and going, what does that even mean? Believe me, you're not alone. It sounds somewhat controversial, but what I want to do is give you a little bit of an intro into why I even put this topic together as well. Before we do that, I need to address the absolute masterpiece that was Shirley's talk just before this. Can we get a round of applause for sure? That was tremendous. Yeah, and a little confession inspired by that actually is this talk is pretty technical. There's a lot of live coding. But this comes out of like imposter syndrome on my part, because my earlier talks were not, right? They were very like soft skills and leadership focused, and I felt like they didn't fit, and I felt some type of pressure to like, okay, let's do code. But honestly, I tend to prefer the ones that are more about someone's journey and a story and things like that. Anyway, all that to say, we will do code, but it comes from a place of listening to expectations and trying to live up to them. So relatable. Thank you, Shirley. So why everyone needs to use a framework. This talk was inspired by a tweet from the great Andrew Clark over at Vercel, works on the React core team, and earlier this year published a post on X that says if you use React, you should be using a React framework. If your existing app doesn't use a framework, you should incrementally migrate to one. If you're creating a new React project, you should use a framework from the very beginning. And we all, I think, for those of us who follow the discourse, read this and went like, oh, okay, cool. And I found myself as an engineer asking why. And this is, I'm sure we can relate to that. As engineers, we tend to be curious and we want to understand the reasons behind things. And so there was a lot of discourse. We asked, we found out, etc. But that is kind of the intro to the talk, why everybody needs to use a framework. Okay? This talk is heavily rooted in mechanism. We're going to talk about underlying mechanism of why it's better to use a framework, the value that frameworks bring. But I would be remiss if I didn't say that this talk is not going to help you like learn to use a framework or even learn to use React. Those things there's documentation for. Go to react.dev. Remix has fantastic documentation, as does Next.js. This isn't so much a talk about how to use a thing. It's a talk about how a thing works and the value it gives you so that you understand the mechanism. And once you understand the mechanism, you can make the best decisions for yourself and your team. That's kind of the goal, is that we understand a little bit of mechanism, and then that gives us conceptual levers we can pull and get the most out of React applications today, okay? So if we want to talk about why everyone needs to use a framework, we should start by talking about what even is a framework. And I love looking at this question because a framework, unlike the term serverless, is exactly what it sounds like. Okay? A framework is literally a frame within which your application can work. So there's been a lot of debates about React. Is it a library? Is it a framework? I would reserve a conclusion on that. I would encourage you to wait until David Khurshid's talk at the end of the day to debate about whether React's a framework or a library. But a framework typically has opinions. It has guardrails. It has conventions that enable you to not think about those things and instead think about your applications. Think about the products that you're building. These usually look like having a directory where you have your pages, your routes. These look like having concrete ways to fetch data and more, such that you don't have to think about, oh, what's the best way to fetch data? You just use what the framework tells you to use in the service of shipping your stuff fast, efficiently, safely, okay? That's what a framework is, but what do frameworks then do? Frameworks do a lot. They do a lot of heavy lifting, but for the purpose of the 25 minutes we have today, I want to focus on 3 specific things that most, if not all, frameworks solve for us. Thing number 1 is server rendering. Most, if not all, React frameworks have some type of server rendering story. Even if it's just like static site generation, you usually generate it on a server and then get HTML files that you ship to a CDN. Server rendering has a number of benefits that actually makes your site work according to how websites work on the web traditionally. They ship markup to clients. They do not ship a blank page that suddenly downloads JavaScript and elements are added dynamically after the fact, right? So they're more true to the web, but also they turn your pages into discoverable documents for search engines. They work without JavaScript, etc. There's a number of benefits around server rendering. This isn't a talk about server rendering, but frameworks give you this, usually out of the box. Number 2, they give you isomorphic routing. Anyone remember back in the day when we used to have client-only apps with client-only routing? Yeah, I see some people going, that's the best way. It's not. We used to do this thing where we would have a client router, but someone would navigate to slash some route on the server. The server would respond with a 404. And then our 404 page would load a client bundle, and then the client router would take over, and it would be like, no, everything's fine. It's not really a 404. We got this, right? But this is a lie. The server is lying to the client, and the client's kind of covering up the sins. It's not sound. It's certainly not sound for user agents that depend on status codes, like search engines. A 404 is usually not going to be indexed because it's a 404. So isomorphic routing on the client and on the server is something you get for free from frameworks like Next.js, Remix, etc. Number 3. Is data fetching. Most frameworks, if not all, give you some type of data fetching story to make your life easier. This is through conventions in Next.js, through things like get server-side props, in Remix through the loader mechanisms, etc. Even in SvelteKit and Solid Start, Quick, most frameworks have these primitives. And finally, frameworks give you an easy way to deal with all of the edge cases that we probably miss. And that's because they have the benefit of mass adoption. So before you even know you have a problem, there's a high chance someone else somewhere else in the world has had the problem, has opened an issue, and it's been dealt with before you even had the problem, right? And this is something that frameworks give you out of the box. So should you use a framework? I mean, for these benefits, maybe. But we've reached now the point in my talk where I'm tired of listening to my own voice. I tend to get bored of my own presentations, and so I think let's just maybe write some code and understand these mechanisms in a little bit more depth. Specifically, I want to understand server rendering. I want to understand data fetching, and I want to understand routing. Specifically also around why things, for example, in Next.js need to be default exports, why we need certain directories, etc. So if you'll humor me for the next, 15 minutes or so, what we'll do is we'll open our browser and VS Code. The browser has a client-only React application that does not much. It shows you a list of good boys using my favorite API, the dog API. If you go to dog.ceo, it's just a free API. You choose your favorite dog breed, like a Havanese, and it loads for a bit and shows you a picture of an adorable little Havanese. You scroll to gosh, how do you even say that? Gronenandel. Wait, let's zoom in. So let's go to a commandor, and you kind of see it. So this is client only, and with that, you get some client only problems. For example, if I view the source, there's nothing here. There's no dog breeds. It's just an empty shell. This is what agents who don't support JavaScript would see. In fact, if I, in the DevTools, disable JavaScript and reload, I get this. Look at that, a whole lot of nothing. Amazing. Not really. So how do we solve this? Frameworks solve it through server rendering. So to address this, let's build the beginnings of a framework. But before we do that, we'd be remiss if we didn't walk through the client-only code so far. So let's do that. We have an index.tsx, classic React Bootstrap, nothing special. We render an app into a root. The app, we have a bespoke client router because I was too lazy to npm install something. And the router just gives context to the rest of the app. It's really nothing fancy, has some push state, but it basically tells the app, here's the current path, and here's how you change it, okay? And renders children. Route is pretty much what you'd expect. If the paths match, show children, otherwise show null. It's very bare bones, but the goal is to understand mechanisms, so we're not going to try for correctness here today in 25 minutes, okay? we have the list of breeds, and here it's exactly what you see on the left side, an H1 with good boys, and we map over a list, show a link to a breed. For our data fetching story, we're fetching from here in use effect, and then setting state, right? And we kind of do, this is a pattern that unfortunately is in the vast majority of client-only React applications. And it's not an ideal pattern because it leads to a number of network and CPU waterfalls and is not the most performant. In fact, if you're fetching data in React, it's usually a good idea to fetch as early as possible. And in many ways, this is fetching as late as possible because you're waiting for render and then you're fetching. It's just not a good practice. So how do frameworks solve this? Let's take a quick look at the single breed page. There's a dog called Boo Tick. Weird, it's a tick. Anyway, same thing. We're fetching some images and then we're rendering, okay? So let's frameworkize this. And to start with that, I just want to disable JavaScript and go from like bare bones. So we'll go to the root with no JavaScript. We have a blank page. And what we're going to do is let's just make a server. So we'll server.tsx. Oh, .jsx, no way. Live coding would not work in JavaScript, for me anyway. So we need a server, so let's get some Express. You can use whatever you want. I'm more familiar with Express. We'll do React from React. We need something from React DOM. Oh, wow, Copilot, thank you. We'll do render to string, why not? And we need our app from .app. App is a named export, so we'll do that. We can just get started, sure. We'll just have Copilot write this whole thing for us. App, sure, but it's actually wrong, it's dist. It's confidently wrong. And we can app.get on the root directory, we get something, and a response object. And we can end the response with rendering the app to the string. But this isn't really sound HTML, so let's be good people and do that. Get a nice template going. We'll camel case character set. And in body, we'll do div ID root, because that's where our client bundle hydrates. And this should be kind of what we want. And then we'll app.listen on port 3000, okay? We'll save that. We have a really bare bones, so we're just trying to see what we can get. So we're listening on port 3000, so I'm gonna go ahead and run port 3000, but before that, let me just build npm run, where are we? Okay, we'll npm run build, and then we'll just start the server, nothing more. And it should be listening on 3000, so if we do that, okay, we have an error, window is not defined. And that's because of our router, which we didn't account for. So we'll go to the router, and instead of accessing window, we're in a server, we don't have a window, right? So we'll do something like an initial path, and we'll just add it to props here. We're going to unfortunately be doing some prop drilling, but ideally there's better ways. So now this thing needs an initial path, we'll drill that through from app. And now our client bundle is going to need an initial path. This we'll get from the window. We can, because this is a client bundle. And on the server side, we still need an initial path. And we'll get this from the request object. So rec.path. Path. Okay, that should solve that. Let's check. What we're going to do is reload. It works. Good boys. Thank you, except we're not fetching data. It sucks. So now we can kind of fix this by cheating, right? We can just like include client-side React. So we'll do like script source is /client.js. We'll do this, and we'll be sure to enable JavaScript here. This is kind of like a Band-Aid if we want to throw one on. This should, whoa, okay. Yeah, great, we're using React on the client side, and it kind of sort of works, but does it though? Like if we don't have JavaScript, we don't have arguably the most important content on the page, which is the list of breeds. And similar, if we view source, we don't have the breeds. So we're not actually getting the markup we deserve or we need, okay? So this then immediately says, hey, you solved server rendering, but what's the data fetching story? What's the routing? So we also just have a root route. Like if I start this server, and if I go to like /breed, and B is like, I don't know, Bazenji, because that's my autocomplete, that route doesn't exist. So we like server render one page. This is not a framework. Let's add routing. To add routing, we need to think a little bit, right? We need some convention. We need some way to know how to get the right component for the right route. Okay? Let's see how we go. So what we'll do, we'll start by making the route a parameter. And what I would love to do is do something like this. Const module, we'll turn this into async, and we'll just like do a dynamic import of what exactly? Well, we'll join the path of the current working directory, dist pages, and we'll do like rec.params.route. So we're getting the component for this route. But it's a bit complicated because the named export for breeds, for example, is breeds. And the named export for the single breed page is breed. And so we can't do this changeably. We need to enforce the fact that it needs to have a named export that is the same across all modules. Thankfully, that exists. It's called default. And this is why in most frameworks you need to have default exports. So what we can do is we'll just change this a bit. So instead of const breeds, we'll do export default breeds. And this is literally why Next.js needs default exports for pages, default breed here. Okay, so we have default exports. Let's go update our client bundle. We don't want to forget about that, definitely. So we'll go to app. Things have changed here. These are now default exports. And let's add a pages directory just to make sure we get the right things from the right place. So we'll do pages, and we'll move breeds and breeds into pages, just like that, okay? We'll also rename them to lowercase just to be safer. Some operating systems and server environments care about that kind of thing. And then if we go to app, we've got to also update our imports now. So we'll do lowercase, and this is pages. And I think somewhere there's a link component that isn't updated because of, yeah, here, perfect. Okay, so we've moved things around, that's kind of it, but now we have a default export for our component. So instead of rendering the app, we'll just render the component by the route param. I hope this is clear so far. We'll save that and see what happens. So let's rebuild our server, restart it, go to /breeds. And interesting, it appeared and then disappeared, and that's because we have client-side React kind of taking over, and our client-side router here is on /. So we'll fix this here, but also let's just disable JavaScript, because we want this to be fully server rendered. Okay? We'll disable JavaScript, rebuild our server again, and we have it. And not only do we have this on the sub-route, we should have the other one. So we'll go to this, and we do. It's loading. So we've got routing, we've got server rendering. We need to close the loop on data fetching. Okay? But hopefully by now you kind of understand why frameworks have these pages directories or routes directories, why they have default exports, etc. So we've solved 2 out of 3. Let's finish it with data fetching. So if we go to breeds, we don't want to do this. We want to fetch as early as possible. How early is that? Well, that's as soon as you access a route on the server, let's kick off fetching there. Okay? So what we'll do is we'll just factor this function out into module scope. We'll call it getStuff. It's an async function, and we'll just return I don't know, let's call it initial breeds is await, and we'll just paste that fetch there. Instead of set state, which doesn't exist in the scope, we'll just return this. Return, okay, cool. That's really all we're doing. And now we'll get stuff dot then. This is going to give us props. And we will set, what is it? Where is it? Set breeds. We'll do that here. Set breeds to props dot thank you TypeScript. We just move stuff around. This looks good. Let's also add a prop here, initial breeds, because maybe we want to pass that in from the server, and we'll replace the empty array with initial breeds. Okay? So we just moved stuff around, that's it. But now that this exists in module scope, we can export this fetching function to the server. Let's do that. So we can run this both on the server and on the client. So we export this, go back to our server, and now we know we may have get stuff. Okay? And if we do, we can get stuff. The stuff we're getting is props. So we let props be an object, and we'll set it here. So props is await, and we'll just call mod.getStuff. It's going to give us props. And what do we do with those props? Well, we just spread it on the component that we made. Save. So we're fetching as early as possible and then giving it to the component. Let's rebuild this and see what we have. Whoa. I'm missing my initial breeds prop in the client, so let's go make that optional, actually. That's probably going to be better, so there. Thank you, TypeScript. Perfect. So now if I go back to breeds, keep in mind JavaScript's disabled. There we go, we're fetching. We're fetching early, thank you. We're fetching on the server. But if I click here, Beagle, I'm not fetching in the single page, so let's go fix that. And we're going to just repeat the same thing, so we'll copy this, factor it out. Now we have a convention, right? Because on the server we're depending on get stuff. So it has to be get stuff. Or get server-side props in Next.js. Anyway, so we get stuff, we return more props. This will be initial image. And once again, it's just await, we fetch. And instead of these things that don't exist in scope, we just do that. And this is going to be interesting because we don't need the loading state anymore because the server does the loading. So we can just get rid of that. We can get rid of that. We can get rid of that. Set breed. What we can do here is we could just we can get rid of a whole bunch of things. And what we can do now is get stuff dot then against we get props and we set image to props dot initial image. Thank you, TypeScript. Okay. We don't really need to set breed anyway. Whatever. We'll keep it like that. That's kind of all we have. And again, we have some issues here because breed needs a parameter. So what we'll do is we'll give it arguments. We'll say b, and b is intended to be a string. So we'll do that, and we'll use b here. So now we need to pass some stuff to get stuff. We need to pass some arguments to get stuff. B is breed. How do we do that on the server side? Well, we have query params, literally, like right here. This prop b is beagle, if you can see that. So we'll do mod get stuff, but we'll use rec.query. That's kind of it. And now, if we rebuild our server and rerun it, come on, come on, come on, there we go. Where's the image? I am not fetching the right thing. What are you supposed to be? See, if my demo falls apart now, I know none of you will judge me, but I will judge myself. But it's all good. Let's go check quickly. I'm sure this isn't going to be. Someone saying something? Line 6? Oh, it's line 6? What? It's fine. Oh, I need to pass an initial image as a prop. I think that's why, right? Because I'm getting it from the server and I'm not passing it. This is fine. And again, it's an empty string. All right, let's try that again. Nice catch. It wasn't line 6, but I appreciate the sentiment. There we go, perfect. There's one more issue. Thank you, thank you. There's one more issue. If I click go back, I'm going to go back to the root route. But as we saw in our new conventionalized pages directory, breeds is where we want to go. So we'll just fix that little link right there, rebuild everything, go back to our cute little beagle. And we go back, and we have none of this uses client React at all. This is just fully server rendered, server fetched, and server routed. And frameworks give you all of this for free. That's the underlying mechanism. Okay? There's one final issue with this, and this is, I want to draw your attention to this because it's very, very important. Frameworks often do so much for you that you don't even know about, right? Can I, if I ask someone to point out an issue with this server code, I mean, there's plenty of it. It's a 25-minute server, but one of those issues is that we're using render to string. Render to string from React DOM is a synchronous API. So if you've got a very deep React tree that's very complex, it will do a lot of CPU work to render this on the server, and then you get a giant HTML string, and then there will be network I/O that sends a massive string to the browser. Okay, that's blocking. So a server typically serves multiple clients, and if many clients place that kind of load on the server, that kind of computational load, not only will it stall, block the event loop, it might crash. It's just not a useful API for large things under load. So React exposes a newer API called render to pipeable stream, which is asynchronous and doesn't do everything at once. It renders, and as things get ready, it just streams them over the network. The API is not the same, so instead of ending the response, what we do is we get a pipe function out of this, but that's kind of the only difference. And we can pass in a second argument that says bootstrap scripts, and we can pass in the client bundle here. It's actually just slash. So, and then finally, we say when the page is ready or when the shell is ready, in this case I'm using on shell ready, I want to then pipe to the response. So it's a little bit of a different API, but it's got leaps and bounds in terms of performance and security improvements. So let's kill the server, restart it, and now we have a proper serverful implementation. Finally, we don't have React on the client side, so let's quickly add that by enabling JavaScript. And we have come full circle. Basically, this is what frameworks do for us. This is a subset, I should say, of what frameworks do for us, and not the whole picture. But they take a lot of work. Why is there no image? Did I mess up something on the client side? Probably. What did I? I love it. I'm not setting the breed from query params. that explains it. I think I deleted that line a while ago. Let's undo everything and see if there we go. Look at that, boom. Okay, let's redo gosh, I love VS Code. This is so fantastic. Okay, and now we have, let's do this. Perfect. Show me the client button. I need to rebuild the server, don't I? Yeah, perfect. Okay, so we've come full circle, and that's essentially what frameworks do for us. And that's true today. But there's a whole topic of what frameworks will do for us in the future. You see, because React Server Components is a thing that we're talking about. It's not yet production ready, by the way, still. Though Next.js is production ready. Don't ask me how that works. Not here for that. But React Server Components needs an even more set of tools that don't yet really exist en masse. For example, you need a next generation bundler to compile the appropriate server and client bundles necessary for your application. You need a next generation router as well, etc. React Server Components require the addition of another type of server almost that parses a React JSX tree into another tree, and then you hand that off to an SSR tree. So servers talk to servers, and actually servers are now clients of other servers. It gets very complex. And this is kind of the other reason why you need frameworks. Because if you spend your time wrangling servers, you're not really building your product. And it can take away from your engineering team's productivity, okay? So let's answer the question, does everybody need to use a framework? You can benefit from it, and if you don't use a framework, you probably will end up like rolling your own, and it's not going to be as battle-tested as something that's adopted en masse. So going off of that, probably. But then again, I know a lot of people in consultancies or other businesses who are just working solely on internal projects that aren't really, e-commerce stores that need mass adoption. You're working on something internal that it's fine if it's client rendered, doesn't matter. You can just go ahead with Vite. So I think the answer to this question is more nuanced than yes, just use a framework. And I think it's the great answer to really most technical problems, which is that it really depends on what you're building. But I hope that I've given you enough context to make your own decisions. To summarize and wrap up, we covered a tremendous amount of content, I think, for 25 minutes. We looked at implementing a server that server renders. We then added routing. And in so doing, we understood the need for default exports as a convention. We understood how get server-side props kind of works to solve the data fetching story. We finally came full circle and went from a synchronous API to an asynchronous one and added the client bundle to the mix. I hope this has given you a deeper understanding of frameworks. It's as much as we could fit into 25 minutes. There is a longer version of this, much longer on my YouTube channel. I'm not going to tell you to subscribe and hit the bell because I'm not interested in that, but if you wanted to watch that, it's up there. Also, these topics and more will be covered in an upcoming book I'm writing on React. You're welcome to check that out if you want to. I'm not here to sell you anything, but I do think there's value in understanding underlying mechanism that helps us build better applications together. With that, React Rally, I want to say thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute honor and privilege to be here.